If you've ever taken a subway late at night, you know how strange it can feel when the stations start getting empty. The lights seem dimmer, the tunnels feel quieter, and every little sound echoes through the train like it's louder than it should be. I've been working as a subway train operator for almost 7 years, and by that point I was used to the night shift. Most nights were the same routine: drive the route, stop at each station, pick up the occasional passenger, and repeat the loop until the early morning commuters started arriving. Nothing unusual ever really happened. At least, that's what I used to think before one shift completely changed the way I look at those late-night routes. It was around 1:40 a.m. during the last loop of the line. By that point the trains are usually almost empty, and that night was no different. At the second-to-last station, 3 passengers got off the train, leaving the cars almost completely empty. When the doors closed and the train started moving again, I glanced at the long mirror inside the driver's cabin that lets you see down the length of the train behind you. That's when I noticed someone sitting in the very last car. A man wearing a dark jacket with the hood pulled up. His head was tilted down slightly like he was staring at the floor. That wasn't strange by itself. Sometimes people ride the train late just to get across the city, or they fall asleep during long rides. So I didn't think much of it at the time. A minute later the train pulled into the final station of the route, the stop where everyone is required to get off so the train can reset for the next loop. The doors opened and I made the usual announcement over the intercom telling everyone the train had reached the last stop. Normally people stand up and leave immediately. But when I checked the mirror again, the man in the last car hadn't moved at all. I waited a few seconds, expecting him to get up once he realized the train wasn't going any farther. But he just sat there perfectly still. Thinking he might have fallen asleep, I stepped out of the driver's cabin and walked through the empty cars toward the back of the train. My footsteps echoed loudly in the silence as I moved from one car to the next. When I reached the last car, the man was still sitting in the corner seat exactly the same way I'd seen him before. I cleared my throat and said, "Hey man, last stop. Everyone has to exit the train." For a moment he didn't react at all. Then slowly, without saying a word, he stood up. His hood was still covering most of his face. He walked past me and stepped off the train onto the empty platform without even looking in my direction. I watched him walk away for a few seconds before heading back to the driver's cabin to start the next loop. It was a little strange that he hadn't said anything, but people act weird on the train all the time, especially late at night. I didn't think much of it and started the route again. At the first station of the new loop, 2 college students got on the train laughing loudly and sat near the middle car. A few minutes later an older woman stepped on at the next stop and took a seat near the front. Everything seemed completely normal again. But when I glanced at the mirror that showed the train behind me, my stomach suddenly tightened. The same man was sitting in the exact same seat in the last car again. Same dark jacket. Same hood covering his head. Same still posture. For a moment I thought I must have made a mistake earlier and maybe he never actually got off the train. But I knew that wasn't possible. I had watched him step onto the platform and walk away. There had been no one else on the platform who could have boarded after him. Still, I tried to ignore the feeling creeping up the back of my neck. Maybe he had gotten off and walked to another car before I returned to the driver's cabin. It wasn't impossible. The train continued moving through the route, and at the next station, the college students got off. A stop later the older woman exited too. Soon the train was completely empty again. Except for the man in the last car. He still hadn't moved. That's when I decided to check the security cameras inside the train. Every car had its own camera, and the feed showed up on a small monitor in the driver's cabin. I switched to the camera for the last car. The seat was empty. I stared at the screen for a moment, confused. Maybe I had pulled up the wrong camera. I switched to another angle of the same car. Still nothing. No passenger. No movement. Just an empty seat. A cold feeling started spreading through my chest. I slowly looked back at the mirror that reflected the train behind me. The man was still sitting there. Completely still. My heart started beating faster as I looked back at the monitor again. The camera feed still showed nothing. The last car looked completely empty. I leaned closer to the screen, wondering if maybe the camera was glitching or lagging somehow. But the image was perfectly clear. There was no one there. Then I looked back at the mirror again, and that's when the man suddenly stood up. He lifted his head slowly, and for the first time I could see his face in the reflection. Except there wasn't one. The inside of the hood looked completely dark, like the light just stopped at the edge of it. Before I could even process what I was seeing, the figure began walking forward through the train. One car at a time. Getting closer to the driver's cabin. I quickly looked back at the camera monitor again. The screen still showed empty cars. Nothing walking down the aisle. Nothing at all. But in the mirror behind me, the dark figure was getting closer with every second. My hand started shaking as I grabbed the radio and called the control center. I told them I thought the camera in the last car might be malfunctioning because it wasn't showing a passenger that I could clearly see. There was a long pause on the other end of the radio before the operator responded. And when they finally spoke, their voice sounded confused. They said something that made the blood drain from my face. According to their system, my train had no passengers on board. I slowly turned my head toward the mirror again. The figure had reached the door of the driver's cabin. It stopped there, perfectly still. Then it slowly raised one hand and knocked on the door 3 times.